And they led the Western Bloc against the freedom struggles all over Africa and in the Third World and in those countries dominated by the previous colonial and imperialist countries. So the point that I'm making is, let's take South Africa as an example.
And Namibia.
Well, yes, my sister is reminding me about Namibia. Let me just touch on Namibia. Namibia was ruled through previously the colonial powers, or one of these not so big colonial powers was Germany, and they controlled Namibia. And Germany wasn't that strong as a colonial power, and they slowly relinquished that kind of control, and they couldn't run this empty, big land mass. And so, without going any further, it was handed over to the UN as a protectorate. Because South Africa was the biggest country on the border with a powerful system under the control of Western powers, that's before liberation, South Africa was given the so-called guardianship of Namibia. The struggle for liberation then began inside Namibia with the people inside, trying to break that control that the UN protectorate, as it was called, with South Africa, and said, we want our self-determination. Now there is an example of pure majority people, all of them, standing up against outside forces, but fighting for self-determination from a colonial concept and a colonial background. The liberation struggle was fought against South Africa, which wanted to keep Namibia. If Namibia was a total barren land, just a desert, South Africa would have given it up. But it had certain strategic roles to prevent South Africa's liberation. And of course it had mineral wealth and lots of other material that South Africa was also exploiting. We know Namibia fought, and after a lot of difficulties which South Africa couldn't face, they had to give up Namibia. And in 1989, Namibia became independent, and it is a free state with a constitution that's not as good as South Africa's. We know the history of South Africa. I'm not going to go into that. But we came out with what is a process that also touches on this word transitional justice. Because transitional justice worked in a certain form in South Africa, it should not be used as a magic formula or a silver bullet for other countries, which is often being used even in relation to Sri Lanka. Transitional justice is also like a swear word. It's a way of maintaining the status quo and continuing oppression of minorities whilst negotiations are taking place, while people talk about TRCs, and while they talk about truth and reconciliation, or all the other freedom of prisoners, political prisoners, detainees, and so on, and they bargain for time. It is an instrument that is useful. I don't want to write it off as a problem, but it must be dealt with honestly, and it must be dealt with real integrity. Otherwise, transitional justice as a concept will be destroyed. And we hope that those who are talking about it will remind themselves that it has to be given meaning. Transitional justice embraces accountability at all levels. It embraces time frames. Those are the two things. If they are not followed, transitional justice will just be a problem. And that is what we are seeing with most situations where self-determination is even recognized by the UN, but the UN is in a trap with these oppressive forces and states to buy time, to maintain status quo and delay justice for the people. So we can see that self-determination is often fighting against religious domination. It could be fighting against racial domination. Even if you take Sri Lanka, for example, there's a question of a racial divide. of Sinhalese majority against Tamil minority. It may be linguistic, but it also has, as we've seen, certain Buddhist religious elements preach a kind of dominant philosophy, crushing anybody else who's non-Buddhist, and so on. We've seen in Palestine the issues there of why is Israel being deemed to be an apartheid state. It is also coupling the concept of even the race and separation to its extreme form. So we have these kind of issues that cause people to mobilize and to want to liberate themselves. And the South African experience, which is a growing one, we are only 22 years in past democracy. Our constitution is not the best, but it is a model because it's called a constitutional democracy. Chair, I will just summarize what it is before I stop. Constitutional democracy, what it is about. It deals with the concept of separation of powers between a legislation that makes the laws of the land, the executive, which is comprised of the ruling party, a political party with its leadership that has to take executive decisions, and the judiciary. The judiciary in South Africa is the most important arm of a constitutional democracy. You write out your constitution, but you put all the laws in there, not in the constitution, but the constitution will govern all the laws, but the constitutional act is the supreme law of the country. It will overrule the religious groups because it won't make religion the ruling authority. It won't make a theologian, whether it's the Pope with respect or whether it's the Grand Mufti of some Middle Eastern country or an Ayatollah to be the ruler who has a final say over the parliament and the laws. It won't make the Queen of England, who's the head of the monarchy, although she has given up her powers, but that's how the king ruled in those days. And even now, in Swaziland, the king is the absolute monarch with the parliamentary democracy, but the monarchy has the power over the democracy. So when we talk about a secular state, a state based on equality and justice, all those people can look after their religious interests, their sectional interests, whatever other things, but the word of the law will govern. And the judiciary must be strong and independent. In South Africa, we have tensions there, but we have one of the best chief justices that South Africa has ever seen and will be seen in time to come to be one of the best in the world. He is strong. Chief Justice Mogoeng, remember that name. He is taking on the executive in South Africa. He challenges the parliament, and both don't like it, because he is showing that the judiciary will interpret the laws of the land in terms of what the Constitution says. Not, although he's a very, very religious man, he's a preacher, but he will not mix his Christian interests in the way he judges the laws of the land. That is a classic example. So a constitutional democracy will keep the parliament in check, will keep the executive in check by interpreting the laws in favor of the people. And that is, our jurisprudence is there, all the laws and cases that you take to court. It will force a person in South Africa who wants justice to go to court, not take up arms, or not go and break down doors. There are problems we have in South Africa where some of these things are happening, but it is a framework for absolute positive outcomes that will eliminate concepts of division on race, religion, whatever else, ethnic group or tribalism, but it should also embrace something that we should be aware of, and that's economic equality. And if you have to embrace socialism, you have to embrace concepts of a classless society, where there's equality in a true sense across the country, you will then have an ideal state. I think Cuba tried and was almost there if they were not subjected to the kind of struggles that they faced.
Okay.
But Cuba needed to also be democratic in the way it allows its people to express itself. And if it was given that chance, I believe it would. Thank you very much.